Some people believe a uniform makes them powerful. Some believe a badge gives them the right to treat others however they want. Officer Ryan Mitchell was one of those people, a man who saw himself as above the rest, untouchable, feared, respected. So, when he saw a black man standing in line at a high-end coffee shop, dressed casually, minding his own business, he didn't see a customer. He saw someone who, in his mind, didn't belong. First came the side eye, then the rude remarks. And when that wasn't enough, the ultimate sign of disrespect, Officer Mitchell spat at him. But here's the twist. The man he just humiliated, he wasn't just any customer. He was his new boss, the newly appointed chief of police. And by the time Mitchell realized the truth, it was already too late. Before we dive into this jaw-dropping story, take a second to hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell icon, and drop a comment below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced an abuse of power? Share your thoughts. We're reading every comment. Now, let's get into it. The morning rush had just begun. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as customers shuffled into Crestwood Cafe, a popular upscale coffee shop in the city. Business professionals, students, and early risers stood in line, some buried in their phones, others chatting quietly as they waited for their orders. Among them was Nathan Carter, a tall, well-dressed black man in his mid-40s. He had an air of quiet confidence, the kind of presence that naturally commanded respect without demanding it. He had just moved to town, adjusting to his new role in the police department. But today wasn't about work. Today, he was just another customer, craving a cup of coffee before heading to an important meeting. Little did he know, this morning was about to take a turn he never expected. A few feet away, Officer Ryan Mitchell strolled in, uniform crisp, sunglasses resting on top of his head. He was the kind of cop who walked like he owned the place, shoulders squared, chin lifted, eyes scanning the room like he was always looking for trouble. Mitchell had been on the force for years. He wasn't high-ranking, but in his mind, he was above most people. He prided himself on being old school. His version of keeping order often blurred the lines between enforcing the law and abusing his authority. And when his eyes landed on Nathan, he made a decision without even knowing who he was. Nathan stood near the counter, hands in his pockets, patiently waiting for his order. Nothing about him was out of place. His posture was relaxed, his demeanor composed. But to Mitchell, he didn't fit in. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. A black man, in a place like this, dressed casually, standing among wealthy professionals. It didn't sit right with him. Instead of getting in line, Mitchell made a beeline straight for Nathan. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone sharp, authoritative. Nathan blinked, taken aback. "Excuse me." Mitchell crossed his arms, sizing him up. "I asked what you're doing here. You lost or something?" A few heads turned. Customers shifted uncomfortably. The barista behind the counter hesitated before calling out the next order. Nathan exhaled slowly. He had been through this before. The assumptions, the unnecessary confrontation, the moment when someone decided that his presence alone was a problem. But he hadn't expected it here, not like this. Still, he remained calm. "I'm waiting for my coffee, just like everyone else." But Mitchell wasn't satisfied. He wanted a reaction. He wanted to establish dominance. "This isn't the kind of place where people just hang around." His voice was louder now, his posture rigid. "You need to take your business elsewhere." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Elsewhere? I paid for my coffee, same as everyone else." Mitchell scoffed. "Sure you did." The words weren't just dismissive. They were accusatory. Nathan's fingers twitched. Not with fear, not even anger, but with understanding. This wasn't about a cup of coffee. This was about control. And then, just when the air couldn't get any heavier, Mitchell did something he could never take back. He spat, right at Nathan's shoes. A gasp rippled through the cafe. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Nathan didn't move. His jaw tightened slightly, but his eyes remained locked onto Mitchell's, calm, calculating, controlled. Because in that moment, he knew something Officer Mitchell didn't, and the realization was about to shatter everything. For a moment, the entire cafe seemed to hold its breath. The sound of espresso machines hissing, coffee cups clinking, everything faded into silence. All eyes were on the two men. Nathan Carter didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't react with anger or outrage. He just stared. Officer Ryan Mitchell, still standing tall, smirked, his posture radiating arrogance. He thought he had just put Nathan in his place, made an example of him. He had no idea what he had just done. Nathan took a deep breath and slowly pulled a napkin from the counter. Without saying a word, he bent down and wiped his shoe. Calm, steady, unshaken. Mitchell's smirk widened. He thought he had won. Then, Nathan stood up straight and looked him dead in the eyes. "Are you done?" The question wasn't loud. It wasn't angry, but it was powerful. Mitchell's smirk faltered for just a second. He wasn't used to people standing their ground, especially not like this. Composed, in control. Nathan shook his head slightly. "I don't think you realize what you've just done." Mitchell scoffed, crossing his arms. "Oh, I know exactly what I've done. I just removed a problem from this place." A few customers gasped. A woman near the counter whispered, "He's really saying this out loud?" But Mitchell didn't care. He was feeling untouchable. He wasn't just enforcing authority. He was flaunting it. That's when the cafe door opened. A man in uniform walked in, Captain Hughes. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes locked onto Mitchell immediately. Mitchell straightened slightly, his smirk fading. Why was his captain here? Captain Hughes didn't look at him. He walked straight to Nathan, and then he did something that sent an icy chill through Mitchell's entire body. He saluted. Saluted. Mitchell's stomach twisted. His mind was racing. No, this couldn't be." Then Hughes spoke. "Chief Carter, sir, we've been expecting you at the station." The cafe fell completely silent. Mitchell felt his world crumbling. Chief. His throat went dry as his captain's words sank in. Nathan Carter, the man he had just humiliated, was the new chief of police, his new boss. The weight of it hit Mitchell like a brick wall. He had just spat on the most powerful man in the department. And now, it was too late to take it back. Nathan finally spoke, his voice calm, yet cutting. "So, Officer Mitchell, I ask again, are you done?" Mitchell tried to speak, but no words came out. Captain Hughes turned to him, his face like stone. "Give me your badge. Now." Mitchell's hands trembled. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. He opened his mouth to protest, but Nathan cut him off. "Do you know what's worse than what you did, officer?" Mitchell swallowed hard. Nathan's eyes darkened. "You did it so casually, like it was normal for you, like it was just another day." Mitchell felt the room closing in on him. The faces of the customers, the baristas. Everyone was watching. Captain Hughes stepped forward. "Hand over the badge." Mitchell hesitated, still clinging to the last shreds of his pride. Nathan sighed. "Fine, I'll take it myself." He reached out, unpinned the badge from Mitchell's chest, and held it up. Then he set it on the counter. "You're done." The finality in his voice sent shivers down Mitchell's spine. As Nathan turned to leave, the cafe erupted in murmurs. The customers whispered among themselves, some recording, some shaking their heads. Mitchell stood there, humiliated, stripped of the power he had abused. And just like that, His career was over. The fallout. Mitchell stood frozen, his entire world crumbling around him. Just minutes ago, he had felt untouchable, above reproach, drunk on the power of his badge. Now, he had nothing. The whispers in the cafe grew louder. Some customers shook their heads in disgust. Others openly recorded the scene on their phones, their cameras capturing the face of a man who had just lost everything. Nathan Carter, the man he had spat on, walked toward the exit with Captain Hughes by his side. Just as they reached the door, Nathan stopped. He turned back, locking eyes with Mitchell one last time. "You should take a good look at these people," Nathan said, his voice calm but firm. "Because these are the people you swore to protect, and today, you failed every single one of them." Mitchell swallowed hard, his throat dry. He had no defense, no excuse. Nathan sighed, shaking his head. "And the worst part, if you had just done your job the right way, you'd still have it." With that, Nathan stepped outside, leaving Mitchell standing there, small, powerless, and exposed. The department reacts. The fallout from the coffee shop incident hit the department like an earthquake. By the time Chief Nathan Carter arrived back at the precinct, the story had already made its way through the ranks. Whispers filled the hallways. Officers huddled in corners, murmuring in disbelief. Some checked their phones, scrolling through the growing storm on social media. A once respected officer had been exposed. Officer Ryan Mitchell's name was now everywhere. And not for the reasons he wanted. The news headlines were brutal. "Officer disrespects black man in public. Turns out he's his new boss." Disgraced Officer Ryan Mitchell caught on camera spitting on Chief of Police. Corrupt cop humiliated. Justice served in the most unexpected way. The video had already gone viral. In less than an hour, it had been shared thousands of times. People all over the city and the country were watching, commenting, and demanding answers. Inside the precinct, the tension was unbearable. An emergency meeting is called. Chief Carter didn't waste time. He walked straight to the conference room, where the department's top officials were already gathered. The air was thick with unease. No one knew exactly how Carter would respond. But everyone knew this wasn't going to be just another internal investigation. Carter entered the room and stood at the head of the table. He didn't sit. He didn't touch the folder in front of him. He just looked around the room, letting the silence do the work. No one spoke. Then, in a voice calm but undeniably authoritative, Carter finally broke the silence. "What happened today is unacceptable, and it will not go unpunished." A few officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some avoided eye contact. Others knew better than to say a word. But one lieutenant, a man who had worked alongside Mitchell for years, finally cleared his throat. "Sir, with all due respect, we understand that Mitchell's actions were inappropriate, but—" Carter's eyes snapped to him. "But what?" His voice was sharp, cutting. "You were about to defend him, weren't you?" The lieutenant hesitated, but Carter wasn't finished. "Let's get one thing straight. This is not just about one bad officer. This is about a culture that has allowed men like Ryan Mitchell to believe they can do whatever they want. That ends today." Silence. Then, Carter leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. His next words sent a chill through the room. "Ryan Mitchell is no longer a police officer, effective immediately." The firing of Ryan Mitchell. Mitchell had spent years believing he was untouchable, that no matter how many complaints were filed against him, he would always walk away with a slap on the wrist. Not this time. His actions had been recorded. There was no excuse, no cover-up, no misunderstanding. Carter personally oversaw the paperwork, ensuring Mitchell was terminated immediately. When Mitchell arrived at the precinct later that afternoon, he was met with a very different atmosphere. Gone were the casual greetings. Gone were the friendly nods. Gone was the respect he once commanded. Instead, cold stares, avoidance, whispers. As he stepped into the locker room to clear out his things, he caught pieces of conversations. "Did you see the video? Unbelievable." He really thought he could get away with that. "I heard Chief Carter didn't even hesitate. Just fired him on the spot." Mitchell's hands clenched into fists as he threw his belongings into a duffel bag. He was humiliated. And when he walked out of the station for the last time, no one stopped him. No one said goodbye. He had burned every bridge. And for the first time in his life, Ryan Mitchell had no power left. The public demands more. If Mitchell thought the worst was over, he was wrong. Because outside the station, the public wasn't satisfied. Anger was brewing. Protests started forming outside the police department. People weren't just demanding Mitchell's firing. They wanted a full investigation into the department. How many other officers had acted like this? How many complaints had been ignored? How deep did the problem really go? Chief Carter heard them loud and clear. And he had no intention of ignoring their voices. Sweeping reforms begin. Carter didn't stop at firing Mitchell. He immediately launched an internal review of past complaints within the department. Every case of racial profiling, excessive force, and misconduct that had been pushed aside or quietly handled was reopened. Then he announced a series of reforms that shook the entire force to its core. Mandatory de-escalation and bias training, no exceptions. Every officer was required to complete training to prevent incidents like this in the future. Body cam accountability. Officers were warned. Any attempt to turn off or lose footage would result in immediate termination. Community Oversight Board. Citizens were now given a direct voice in evaluating officer behavior. Anonymous officer conduct reports. Officers were now encouraged to report misconduct within their own ranks, without fear of retaliation. Surprise undercover evaluations. Mystery shoppers weren't just for retail stores anymore. Undercover auditors would now test how officers treated civilians. The message was clear. This department was about to change. And anyone who couldn't handle accountability, they could leave. The reaction. Within the department. Not everyone was happy. Some officers saw Carter's reforms as an attack. They grumbled about the department changing too much. Some whispered that Carter was trying to make an example out of Mitchell. But Carter didn't care. Because for every officer who resisted, there were many more who were relieved. Good officers, officers who had dedicated their careers to protecting and serving the right way, finally felt like things were moving in the right direction. They had watched for years as bad cops like Ryan Mitchell poisoned the force's reputation. Now, justice was finally being served. The lasting impact. The shockwaves from the coffee shop incident didn't fade overnight. What happened to Ryan Mitchell wasn't just about one officer's downfall. It became a catalyst for change that spread far beyond the walls of the police department. For years, complaints about police misconduct had piled up. Many had been ignored. But now, the entire system was under a microscope. Chief Nathan Carter had made it clear. No more excuses. No more cover-ups. No more corrupt officers getting away with abuse. And the results? They were undeniable. A shift in police culture, 40% drop in misconduct complaints. Within just 6 months, complaints against officers dropped dramatically. People were finally seeing real consequences for bad behavior, and officers knew it. Increased accountability. More officers started reporting misconduct within their own ranks. For years, the blue wall of silence had protected bad cops. But under Chief Carter, that wall was coming down. Better community relations. For the first time in years, citizens began to trust the police again. Community meetings were packed, not with anger and frustration, but with real conversations about solutions. New hiring standards. The police department stopped hiring officers with histories of misconduct in other cities. Background checks became stricter. Training became tougher. Because one thing was clear. If you couldn't wear the badge with honor, you wouldn't wear it at all. A warning to those who abuse power. Chief Carter's leadership set an example for the entire country. No officer is above the law. Abuse of power will be punished. Justice doesn't care about your badge. It cares about your actions. Other police departments started taking notice. Cities across the country began reviewing their own misconduct cases. More police chiefs started demanding real accountability. And the message was clear. The era of unchecked power was coming to an end. For the first time in a long time, justice was being served. The takeaway. This story isn't just about Ryan Mitchell's downfall. It's about what happens when people finally stand up against corruption. Mitchell thought he was untouchable. But power isn't about control. It's about responsibility. And if you abuse it, it will be taken from you. What do you think? Did justice get served? Comment your thoughts below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced an abuse of power? Share your story. We're reading every comment. Before you go, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon, because stories like this, they need to be heard. Because in the end, respect isn't given by a badge. It's earned by your actions.